In Devin Booker's first words since Game 6, he came out with a difficult to parse tweet, but it told us one thing for sure. It reminded us this is a new era for the Phoenix Suns. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, I'll tell you what I mean and how the Suns can maximize this new era. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendan Clean, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show, wherever you get your podcasts. A big thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen to start off your Wednesday. Recording this before the lottery, but this is a huge week in the NBA, a huge week in Suns world, as there is no head coach on this team. So if you like what you're hearing and you want more, hit follow or subscribe. Get this show in your feed every single day throughout the offseason, into next season, and beyond. We're talking about new eras today. I'll be there with you throughout it. Become an everydayer. Hit that button. Let's go. You can also follow along on Twitter. Drop a comment on the YouTube channel in order to get your thoughts heard. Be part of this community. Have some fun as we make our way through the summer. We have a lot to get to, as we always do this time of year. The rumors are flying, and the Suns have a lot up in the air. Today there was some news, though. If tweeting qualifies to you as news, we shall determine that as we go, I suppose. But Devin Booker, who did not speak after Game 6 in the media availability time, post-game, and then did not speak at press availability, exit interviews on Friday, finally spoke, quote-unquote spoke. Once again, we'll see how you feel about tweets, I guess. But it was interesting. So what Booker said is at 8:30 p.m. on Monday, so I guess I said it was Tuesday. It was actually Monday. He said 36 unbothered, and all the internet sleuths and people smarter than me and maybe younger than me went ahead and decoded this, and I think it's the right interpretation that what he means by 36 is himself and Kevin Durant. I'm going to go off of that for now, but let me rewind back to the initial thing I said there to give you my thoughts, because I had been sitting on it. I didn't want to overreact. I didn't want to misjudge it. Booker not talking to the media. Without getting too nerdy, and, I went to journalism school about it because I don't think that's interesting to anybody, and everybody has their own opinions about this type of thing. I'm sure you do too. Drop it in the YouTube comment section, whatever you want to do here in terms of athletes speaking to media, celebrities speaking to media, any sort of powerful person speaking to the media. Maybe you think that it's important. Maybe you think it's not. I'm not really here to determine that, but it caught my attention as, at the very least, a sign of some frustration, right? And some people, paranoia, I guess, set in, and some people seem to think that there might be a hidden sort of desire to get out of Phoenix or something behind all that. Look, I don't think if Devin Booker did not want to be in Phoenix anymore, the way that he would show that would not be to not speak to the media. There'd be a lot more aggressive ways that we might see that play out. DeAndre Ayton was ready to leave Phoenix last summer, I think, and we found out that because he got into a shouting match with his head coach. Like, those things boil over if you really are out of, patience. The media is not the group that you're going to show that to, right? So I think that was a little bit ridiculous, and as you can hear with how I'm talking about that, I'm definitely not here to scold Devin Booker for not speaking to the media. I personally think that there's a lot of value in being able to explain what your perspective on things are and just generally how you're feeling. What is your message to the people who support you, who pay good money to go see you play, to buy the products that you sell, to buy your merchandise as an athlete, the jerseys and shirts and hats and all the different things, vote for you for All-Star, whatever way you want to talk about it. I think that, in my opinion, in a perfect world, the athlete should fulfill that obligation to the fans and the community that supports them. I'm also not, Pollyannish in order to sit here and say that the world is ending because one athlete did not do it or whatever. It's a bigger conversation about how the pandemic changed things and everything else. I don't think Booker should get hammered for that all that hard. But when you add it to this tweet expressing how unbothered he is, where I go is, because think about the timing, right? He's tweeting this out after his head coach got fired. A move that, online and in the media, there's been some debate about, how involved was Booker? I talked about on Monday's show with Brandon about, was it Matt Ishbia's decision? Was it James Jones' decision? Does it matter? Where are these leaks coming from? Just to sort of get to the bottom of what exactly it is that's going on here. I would imagine that Booker and Durant were at least given a heads up, at least had some level of knowledge about that ahead of time. It would be a little bit silly for them not to at least have been given that. To find out when Woj tweeted it out or whatever would be just a complete unforced error on the part of Suns management. So I would think that they knew. I don't know if it was from them or whatever, but again, the timing to tweet this out after that had just happened is significant. I'm not saying that he has beef with Monty. I mean, we don't know. The tweet is 36 unbothered. It's a little crazy to parse through. What it says to me is that at the very least, Booker has evolved to another level. I've been thinking about the timing of, again, the firing and how he might feel, and the fact that Durant is here, the fact that there is an a new ownership in place that is, even if we still have yet to see the role, the exact extent of Matt Ishbia's involvement here, we can assume that it's very high, but I think as the star player of a team with an owner like that, you probably have a certain level of confidence that comes with that, right? It's like, we are going to do what it takes. And I'm good enough to be the centerpiece of something that gets taken to that next level. And coming off of a playoff run where Booker was unbelievable, like legendary. I know we've used that word because of the Kobe stuff in the past with Booker, but there's no other better word for it. I mean, he was historically great. This was one of the best playoff runs up until, I guess you would say, Game 5, Game 6 of the Denver series, when the foot caught up with him, it seems like, and he ran out of gas for one reason or another. You can't separate that out fully, but, for the majority of this playoff run, it was historic in terms of efficiency and production and everything else. So when you take that fact, you take the fact that he now has one of the biggest stars to ever walk an NBA court in Kevin Durant on his team, and the fact that he now has an owner who seems incredibly committed to getting them where they want to go, I would imagine that there's a certain level of evolution and new perspective that Booker is feeling. Gerald Bourguet wrote a great piece at PHNX about Monty getting fired, and he had this quote from a long time ago from Booker about Monty that said, if it wasn't this way, it might be a little different, but he puts the work in. Coach is locked in at all times, and he just does such a great job of controlling the room, controlling temperaments, egos, and he makes it look really easy because he has those personal relationships with everybody. He then went on to share another quote from Booker about developing the culture, and the players have bought in, continuously getting better, all these different things that Booker has said. But there you still see a little bit of what the Suns maybe used to need, right? It's hard to do this without making it seem like it's very easy to pile on the coach. And so I'm not making it only about Monty, but the reason I'm bringing up Durant's arrival, Ishbia's arrival, and the Monty firing all at once with the timing leading to this tweet from Booker and everything else. He has said everything he needs to say. We all know what Monty's limitations were. We all know the task at hand, which I'm about to get into in terms of what him and Durant's future will look like together and how to build around it. This statement by Booker, the timing of this statement shows to me, coming off of that playoff run, that he has a level of decisiveness, cockiness, and determination to finally get over the hump. They are unbothered because they know how good they are. They know what is the opportunity that's there for them. Booker is speaking a little bit on behalf of Durant there, which is a little funny, but that's where we are. Booker is not in the business of getting, rallying cries and everything else. The task at hand is to win a championship. He knows he's good enough to do that. He knows he has enough around him to do that. And it's sort of a get on board because we're chilling and we are ready to keep going with this, or get off if you're not committed, if you're not up to our level, if you're not bought in, then goodbye. I think that's what that was saying. It's a lot to parse. It's a lot to extrapolate from 2 words in a tweet, and one of which was a number. But that's my take. We'll talk about why I think Booker and Durant backed up that sentiment with their incredible playoff run, and why I'm not worried, despite how it ended, about those 2 in particular next. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by Bird Dogs, the newest sponsor at the Locked On Podcast Network, and they are treating us well, and they will treat you well too. We got a nice package from Bird Dogs this week, all of the Locked On NBA hosts, and they're incredible. They have multiple lengths of inseam, which is nice, so you can pick what you want depending on your style, depending on your size and physique and all that stuff. What's comfortable for you? What do you look good in? What do you feel comfortable in? They have a nice fit with the stretchy fabric on the outside, but some form-fitting fabric underneath. So they have a little bit of that sort of underwear compression pant type of material on the interior to keep you comfortable, to keep everything in place. And then on the exterior, comfort first, stretchy, soft, breathable, which is super important in Phoenix. That's one of the big things. Some of the exercise stuff you get, if it has that compression material, you're just sweaty from the minute you put it on, whether you're working out or not. Bird Dogs is breathable, it's light, it's soft, it's everything that you want. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA to try your own. And when you enter the promo code LockedOnNBA, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. We got one of those as well. I was able to try a nice cup of coffee this morning. You'll get a free one yourself. birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA, promo code LockedOnNBA at checkout. Try yours today. Talked about the veiled messaging on Twitter from Devin Booker there to close out the first segment. Let's get into their actual performance on the court now, something that I took a few days on purpose, a little more level-headed. I've joked with myself, I've made fun of myself throughout the past year about how I responded after the Dallas loss. I went into complete meltdown mode about Booker. I really questioned, was he good enough at what you need to be great at in the playoffs to be a number 1 option? Now, I do feel a little vindicated because it feels like Booker completely dove into the lab last summer after that loss, and he came away with a much better, I would say, handle, much better footwork, much better tempo to his game after the lessons and losses that he suffered through in the second round last year. But he has very clearly proven me to be a complete idiot. He's absolutely good enough. And this playoff run, despite the loss, just proves why. Okay? Devin Booker, after 11 playoff games, playing 42 minutes a night, by the way, 34 points per game on 51% shooting from 3, 61. Let me just say that again, 61% from 2-point range. And he had like a 2.5 to 1 assist to turnover ratio. He even went ahead and chipped in over 1 offensive rebound per game, almost 2 steals and a block per game on top of all of that. The dude was out of this world good. And that includes a game 6 against Denver where he was pretty garbage, overall. I think it was 4 of 13 from the field and not even 20 points if I'm remembering correctly. So those numbers include that performance, that stinker. All right. his usage rate was only 29%, and he had a 29% assist rate, all right? And Durant was only at 29% as well. I think that's relevant here because there was this idea that I'm not even going to get into it because in a deep way, because what's done is done, bygones are bygones, etc. But there's this idea from Nuggets fans that I've heard that really the 6-game series wasn't that close because it needed an all-time performance from Devin Booker to even get them. He had to be a superhero. He had to do everything for them just in order to get the 2 wins that they got. I think that's a little goofy because I think there were plenty of games where if not for Nikola Jokic getting 30-plus point triple-doubles, the Nuggets would have been screwed themselves and won some, close-ish games in games 1 and 2 that way. It's all obnoxious. But the reason I bring it up at all is to defend that Devin Booker actually didn't have to do quite as much as some players do. Jason Tatum has a 33% usage rate and a 21% assist rate in these playoffs. There are any number of superstar players who frequently handle much bigger loads than that. Jokic is at a 27% usage and 37% assist. These are all players that are the number one for their great teams who made it to the conference finals here, who are had to do more than Booker. Durant was obviously a great number 2 for him. Durant was also very good in these playoffs. I talked about after the fact, the night of Game 6, and I don't take back what I said, that I think on the whole, you would have to evaluate what it is that the Suns did in these playoffs and be somewhat disappointed in Kevin Durant. I don't think that's unfair. I think you can say that he was very good, but not quite good enough, and that all can be true, right? I think against Denver in particular, 22% from deep. He had 23 turnovers and just 30 assists. That's not good enough, And honestly, free throw attempts in 6 games was right there. But, if he doesn't make those free throws 45% from the field, the consistent creation and production was not where you want it to be in that series. But on the whole, these guys were 1,000% good enough. The more that I've sat and thought about why some of the things didn't click, why somebody like Durant was seemingly so uncomfortable throughout is, yes, a little bit of Amani Williams' problem, not being flexible enough with the offense. I talked about that in the episode, reacting to the firing immediately. That was the first thing that I went to was, not using the regular season to be prepared for different playoff scenarios, not trying different things, a pick and pop with Kevin Durant as a screener, something, a little bit more sets that put Durant in position to succeed off or on the ball a little bit more, something like the pin downs that we saw time and again at the elbow with DeAndre Ayton and Kevin Durant. Whenever Durant came off of that Ayton screen at the elbow, it seemed like it was an automatic bucket. They went away from that. So there's a lot of things you can point to, but I think a lot of it to me is just you didn't have enough time to gel. Maybe that's a little bit of a case to not fire Monty, but what's done is done. Considering all of that there wasn't a whole ton of creativity, that they were a little bit, sort of a bug flying up against a window a bunch, trying to get out and unable to break through in terms of putting the ball in Durant's hands and turnovers coming and all that stuff. I think that the numbers you look up and see it from him on the whole are plenty to build off of, plenty to say goodbye and put in the rearview mirror the disappointment of the 2022 playoffs, right? When Durant got swept. I'm thinking of the coach thing still. Got swept by the Boston Celtics and was really bad, I think at the very least you have to be able to say that Durant put that to bed, right? Last season in the playoffs in that sweep, he shot 39% from the field, 33% from 3, and had 5 turnovers per game. That would be like the Denver series, but even worse. Think about how frustrating it was to see him struggle against Denver. What Nets fans dealt with last year was that, but compounded, and it was a sweep. And so Durant, at the very least, at the age of 34, going on 35, has now shown that I think he is on the right track, can still be an incredible talent. And I think in his case, he put to bed this, or I don't want to say put to bed. I want to say that he showed exactly what it means when we talk about, sorry to the YouTube audience, my eye is killing me. What it is when we say that a player should be impacting the game as much as possible when their shot is not going in. I thought that Durant was the best rim protector the Suns had in that series, which is something that I was excited about when they traded for him. I thought that Kevin Durant was one of the better defensive rebounders, maybe the best in terms of pursuing loose balls, boxing out bigger players, being in the paint, ready to get the ball when it went up, of anybody on this Suns team. I thought he executed the Suns' goals of getting out in transition in both series, both as a pull-up three-point shooter with that killer classic vintage Durant pull-up three shot that he's known for, as well as getting all the way to the basket. I thought he got to the free throw line. All these little things that you would want somebody to do if they were shooting poorly from the field and from deep, he did. I'm not worried about Kevin Durant. And I would say Booker is still peaking. What he went out and did this postseason not only extinguished the concerns that I sat here in this exact seat and put on this exact channel 1 year ago panicking about Devin Booker. He not only extinguished any of those concerns that crazy lunatics like me who doubted this dude might have had, but he also one-upped that. And he looked like a top 5 player in the league, one of the best guards in the entire NBA, in a conversation with Steph Curry and whatever you call Jimmy Butler, whatever you call, Jaylen Brown, I don't even think, belongs in that conversation, but he's in the playoffs. He's always on great teams, whatever. That's where Booker was, among the very best players in this entire league this postseason. Those guys are the building blocks. And with those two players, no matter what the new CBA changes, no matter how much we can be nervous about a new owner and all the change that might be coming and the depth problems and what do you do with Ayton and Paul, those guys are the real deal. They are still good enough to get that job done, to bring the first championship to this organization. And I'm not doubting that until further notice. With that said, there's that confidence from Booker, the readiness to take a step forward that you can feel with his performance and his words. They're coming off of a performance that reminded us they can still get the job done. So how do you build around them? I'm not going to go deep dive on this trade and this exact contract, but I want to give you a few ingredients that I would think a Booker Durant team ought to have, with specific examples from guys who have made an impact in this playoffs and people who will be free agents this summer, to give you a sense of the types of targets that I would like to see the Suns explore, that I would like to see James Jones consider, and that I think a new coach needs to be able to maximize. We'll get into that in just a second. First, one more quick break. Kevin Durant and Devin Booker might still be the best duo in the NBA heading into next season, even after the disappointment of 2 consecutive second-round exits, a home loss to Denver, a change at head coach, and all the rest. We don't know what trades DeAndre Ayton and Chris Paul might leave town in. We don't know if for sure they even will leave town. We don't know which free agents necessarily that the Suns will look to retain versus which ones they might want to say goodbye to. We don't even know who's making decisions at the end of the day on free agency fully. But I did the Durant and Booker thing first intentionally, partially in order to remind you that while I hear the depth concerns, while I understand the tightrope walk of building this roster with the exorbitant salaries, with the CBA limitations, if you hit that second luxury tax apron, which the Suns may or may not hit, depending on how they move about with some of those bigger moves on the trade front. the roster around these guys doesn't have to be overly complicated. Now, do I think it's those two and a bunch of minimum contract players? No, I think that's probably not a good spot to be in. But I don't think that it has to be. We talked yesterday on Tuesday's show about Harden and Kyrie and why I don't think a third star makes sense, period, even if it were a different guy than those two. The Suns don't even have the assets to go get a lot of extra star power at this point because they've traded all their picks from now until, some kid I haven't even had yet is going to, high school probably. But that is where we are. This is a roster that with decisive, creative, and lucky, obviously, free agent acquisitions and trade acquisitions, they're going to be in the conversation with those two great players to continue to be championship contenders and maybe even be in a better position to win a championship than they are right now. So let's start with shooting. Cheap shooting, to be specific. Because I think it became clear watching Durant and Booker try to coexist with Chris Paul that relationship did not make a ton of sense on the court anymore. I think that the way that Chris Paul wants to play, it's similar to what happened with James Harden. You can be very good. You can be great. You can even be championship caliber, right? With additional ball dominant players next to Chris Paul. You can be very good. But there is a ceiling. That ceiling might be a championship, but there is a ceiling. And when Chris Paul makes as much money as he does, commands as much respect and deference around the locker room, and is not going to just fade into being a shooter, that's the problem. The 3 years that Chris Paul has had here have been incredible. They've been a chapter of his career we never thought was coming, right? Never thought was coming. But this summer, wherever he goes, I definitely think that he's going to be going back to the path of what we thought he was going to finish with in that Oklahoma City era, where he's going to a young team. He is effectively a secondary point guard, backup point guard, whatever you want to call that role. I mean, in Oklahoma City, they had Shea and they had Schroeder, and they would play them all together and got a lot of good stuff out of that. But that's partially because Paul just ended up being better than we thought. But now it feels like he's ready to go back to that. Someplace like Detroit where there's young guards or whatever. I don't want to pour, dirt on the grave. It sucks to have to go to a bad team, and I hope he can make the most of that and whatever. It seems like that's his fate. And so where do you go to find shooting if it's not going to be Chris Paul and the rest of this roster? The Suns were 20th in the NBA in three-point frequency this postseason. They were actually 4th in made threes, but okay, there's only so far that's going to go. The two best players on this team take threes, Booker and Durant. They take a lot of mid-range jumpers as well, but they're not absent of three-pointers. The problem to me is more the role players. They don't have any spacing big men on this roster at this point, and they don't really have a lot of consistent shooting elsewhere. So the three names that I came up with to fix that problem, just off the top of my head as we start free agency, Coby White, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Georges Niang. That ranges from young to older. That ranges from a forward to a guard to a wing. But those are three guys that I think you could get relatively cheaply, taxpayer mid-level, or maybe even something smaller than that, a minimum, who, especially in the regular season, but even in the postseason, would provide you with some confident, consistent shooting, guys who would buy into their role of, I am here to shoot the ball. I'm not here to dribble. I'm not here to, post up or anything like that. I'm here to shoot, and I will make my shots when they're open. Which brings us to just generally, this isn't the most specific thing, but guys who buy into a role, right? You can go any number of ways with this, but on the older side of things, guys like Kevin Love or Al Horford, who play within themselves, execute a very specific set of duties on a team, and are humble enough to commit to that. Dennis Schroeder, I think, would fill in on that older side as well. Schroeder is actually starting game 1 of the conference finals. As I am finishing recording this, he is out there to guard opposing guards. In this case, it will probably be Jamal Murray would be my guess. He is out there to make spot-up threes and to push the pace on offense. I mean, he's really like a better Cameron Payne in a lot of ways, but he knows that at this point. He's not playing outside of himself, even though he goes to France in the offseason and plays like like he's Magic Johnson over there. He comes back, or Germany, sorry. He comes back here and he knows what his role is. Younger guys, Bruce Brown, who I have talked plenty about in the Denver series. Grant Williams, who has some crazy habits, maybe sometimes takes shots he shouldn't, but since he came into the league, he knows he's a 3-and-D big man. That's what his role is. And Caleb Martin, who on the Miami Heat has become a wing stopper. And that's pretty much it. He might cut, he might get to the basket here and there, score in transition, make a couple threes if they're open, but really he's out there to be a defensive tone setter and be very minimally involved on offense. Veterans. I think this team might just get older. So shooting is one. Guys who are sort of specialists, but good specialists. The Suns had a lot of specialists on the roster this year, but they weren't quite good enough. Or guys who thought of themselves in one way, but actually ended up needing to be specialists. Landry Shamet, I think, is a good example. If he actually was a volume 3-point shooter who confidently took those and bought into what it is that he was out there to do, he would be a very different type of player. Instead, the game plan combined with his approach ends up where he's dribbling a lot. He's out there to try to play defense, and it ends up being a C+ at everything instead of a B+ at one thing. You want B+ on one thing. The other thing overall, again, is veterans, just age in general. I have 5 examples. Javon Carter, he's only 28, so he's not exactly over the hill at all, but a return of him, I think, could make a lot of sense on this roster, especially in the regular season. Trey Lyles, another player who is nearing age 30 and is somebody who I think fits into that, humble, just going to execute what it is that he's out there to do, and versatile player who could easily make a big impact in the regular season, and then you'll see in the playoffs. Andre Drummond as a backup center. I think he has evolved into one of the better backup centers, all things considered, in the league. Joe Ingles, who I think can still make threes, can still handle the ball for you. Again, has that humility and leadership. Being a veteran, seems to be well-liked everywhere that he's gone. Isn't afraid to mix it up. And Dwight Powell, another guy who's around 30 now, but as a rim roller, he is a player who has accepted 15 to 25 minutes per game in his career, has made some money, is going to be on his 3rd contract now. That is somebody who I think, if you move on from DeAndre Ayton, is a great example of a player who could be an innings eater option for you at center. I think he's always overly criticized. I think he does exactly what you need from him. He's a little undersized. He's not great at any one thing, but he does enough. And then last thing, younger upside guys. I think that this is something you've heard me beating the drum on for a while with Josh Okogie. It's why I was so thrilled that the Suns went out and got him. A player, a second draft type of player. I believe that's, John Hollinger's phrase for what these guys are who don't get picked up with an extension from their teams, end up on a minimum contract or something, or even are still on their rookie contract and you end up with them in a trade. Or Rui Hachimura with the Lakers is another good example of that. Those types of players are something that great teams should always be betting on. Great teams who are expensive especially. So on that list, I have Jalen Noel, the backup guard from Minnesota, who's always been a good scorer but needs some decision-making help. Kessler Edwards, who is a lockdown wing defender but hasn't been able to round out his game enough yet. Darius Bazley, I think the Suns should re-sign him. Remember him? He's on this team. He's somebody who you could see getting better and filling a role. Lindy Waters, you also remember that name as the guy who killed the Suns multiple times this year with threes. He is a big guy, bigger wing who can shoot with the ball in his hands. Great. Sign me up if I'm the Suns. Try to turn that guy into a consistent shooter, and you might get him for cheap. Jackson Hayes with the New Orleans Pelicans, he's been in and out of their rotation. He had some legal trouble. That is still getting sorted out. It seems like it's a mess, and he was a victim in some ways of what the police ended up doing. I'm just stating all of that to remind you that it is not as simple as it originally seemed with his situation. So that is on the table if you're willing to chance it with all of that fallout. But he is a young big man that if you get him for cheap could be another solution. If you went into the next season and Ayton gets traded for, let's say, a guard and a wing, if that's what it ends up being, and you could say Dwight Powell and Jackson Hayes make a combined $10 million, and those are your two centers on the roster, with the possibility, of course, of also having Kevin Durant play center for you some. Great. That is how an expensive team with star players cobbles together rotation options with not a lot of resources. These are the types of moves the Suns need to be making because, again, to round out this conversation, Booker and Durant are good enough. They are ready to play with one another and approach this with the determination to win a championship that is necessary at this point in the evolution of his career and the franchise's trajectory. And this is how you got to do it. Obviously, much more to dive into, specific contracts, specific trades, who becomes head coach, all of it. So hit follow or subscribe if you have not already to become an everyday or get all of the Suns news and analysis you need every single day on Locked On Suns. Talk to you guys Thursday with Aaron Edwards. We haven't talked since Game 6. We haven't talked since, I believe, going into the Denver series, me and Aaron. So we got to catch up. We have a lot to catch up on. You'll get that show tomorrow. I'll talk to you then.